Hello and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing wonderfully. If this is your first time on the channel, welcome to Rid Book. I'm Rid and I read book. In today's video, I'm going to be ranking all 10 books of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. It came to my attention recently that not everyone is aware that I've even finished this series, which is unsurprising given that I finished the series offline during my booktube hiatus for the past 2 years, but I simply could not let the record stand uncorrected. After reading 10 huge books and spending all that time, there's no way I'm leaving any clout on the table when it comes to Malazan. Ranking these books is meant to serve primarily as an arbitrary structure for me to talk through my general overview on each of the books, but I wholeheartedly invite anyone who feels the need to roast my ranking. Please disagree with me in the comments. I'm especially curious for people who have reread the series to share whether or not your ranking changed drastically from reread to reread. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you enjoyed this video. In unfortunately last place, we have Reaper's Gale. This is already kind of difficult because this was a really good book. I had to be really honest with myself when I was making this ranking, and I switched things around quite a bit. Thinking about Reaper's Gale, I love this book actually. I think it's a really good book. The Test Edur are a fascinating exploration of how a smaller and ostensibly weaker culture might react to a much larger threat of an imperial enemy, how that equation changes in a world where magic exists. That smaller culture is actually able to overpower that bigger and more threatening enemy, how power is all-consuming and all-corrupting. This book is a fascinating study and culmination of that plot point that began in Midnight Tides. I'm by no means trying to say that this is a bad book by putting it in last place. I just think that in terms of personal enjoyment, I hated the Janath Anar. What's her name? Let me look at my notes. Yeah, Janath Anar. Her entire character, to me, I understood from a certain point of view what Erikson was trying to do with her character. At this point in the series, we've already had several characters explore this concept of victimhood, what that does to a person, and I don't think that Erikson handles it horribly, but I do think that this is the one instance where it was just a little too gratuitous for me. The descriptions and going into detail about what's happening to her was unnecessary to depict this very strong person, especially comparing this storyline to someone like Felison, who I felt like was dealt with much more emotional nuance. It really detracted from my overall enjoyment of this book. And the other thing about Janath Anar is that I really felt like her romance with Tehal undermined both her character and Tehal's character. Like at this point, Tehal is shown to us as this really intelligent, idiosyncratic person. Like he's so weird and out there. And then to see him all of a sudden have this insta romance with Janath was really off-putting and jarring to me. It just kind of came out of nowhere. I don't know, maybe on a reread I'll notice more of the hints, if there are any, regarding their relationship, but to me, them ending up together at the end felt like such a rushed conclusion to Janath's character, and I just wanted more from her as this academic professor. Like it could have been this really interesting and different view at the Lethari Empire. That being said, I loved everything that had to do with Rulad. I mean, Rulad to a certain extent is just the Crippled God's own storyline in a smaller, more condensed form. Everything that he goes through, from the pain and suffering that he incurs after he decides to seize the sword that makes him king, and then even his death as release instead of revenge, was a sort of emotional catharsis. Thematically, Reaper's Gale is a great book. It was just that one particular storyline that left a bad taste in my mouth. Next up, we have Dust of Dreams. I really didn't dislike any of the main Malazan books, if I'm being honest. I think that there's a lot to like about Dust of Dreams. It's just so frustrating on a first reread to get to the 9th book and still not know who the Crippled God really is and still just have so many questions about the world. And you know, I kept reading. Obviously, I got to the 9th book. I kept reading because there was something about Erikson's writing that told me that if I got to the end, it would be worth it. Because you're at the 9th book and because you've read through all these huge tomes, you just want a tidbit of information at this point, and you are denied that. Dust of Dreams probably will have the biggest delta in my appreciation between reading it the first time versus the second time around when I do a reread, because I don't know, I just think that knowing what you're getting into with this book will make it that much more easy to appreciate. In third place, we have the Bonehunters. The Bonehunters is only ranked this low because I just happen to love the rest of the books in this series slightly more. The burning of Egerton is one of the most intense and harrowing sequences through the entire series, and it's just brutal and claustrophobic in the best way. And I really love how it brings out the best of the banter in this series and the camaraderie between the soldiers. Hellion is in this book, and I fucking love Hellion. She's the best. Even though I don't love military campaigns, I always love the individual soldiers who populate Erikson's military campaigns. So I feel like if I were a better fantasy reader, this book would be ranked higher. It's not the Bonehunters, it's me. All right, next up we have Toll the Hounds, book 8. I love any of the books set in Darujhistan. Anytime we were in that blue azure city, I was so happy. The city itself just feels alive and like its own character. The people and the mix of magic and the society and the gas lamps, Krupp, all of it creates this very atmospheric backdrop for everything that's going down. Hands down, my favorite setting in the series. The climax in this book actually might be my favorite climax in the whole Malazan Book of the Fallen. The way that Hood is sort of like directly influencing people's lives, and how you see these little vignettes of people going through crazy shit at the climax of this book was so cinematic and fantastical to read. That's something that I love about Malazan, is that even as Erikson is dealing with often these really philosophical and weird and deep esoteric questions, it's never not fantasy. I just love how magic is encoded into the DNA of the series. But anyways, back to Toll the Hounds. The fight between Animander Rake and Hood is this like amazing, spiritual, intense battle. And this is sort of like the moment where Gandalf dies in the Fellowship of the Ring, where Animander Rake dying and Hood dying, like all this crazy stuff. The vibes were just so immaculate that I was on board. Toll the Hounds is just a very moody, deeply atmospheric book that I adored. In next place, we have Memories of Ice. One of my favorite scenes in Memories of Ice is the scene where Corbel Broche and Bauchelain fight the Penayan Seer. Despite my inability to pronounce these names, I love that scene. It's wonderfully choreographed. I remember feeling scared when I was reading it. The introduction of the Penayan Domen and like this weird monster and like fighting it in the middle of the night, it kind of reminded me of something out of like Jurassic Park. And it was definitely a highlight for this book. However, you cannot talk about Memories of Ice without talking about Itkovian. And that scene is so deeply moving. Something that I think of often is this idea of how, and this is like me totally going on a weird tangent here, but there's a certain math to acts of goodness, because I think it's so easy to do evil in the world. Doing something good is so intensely influential that that is what keeps the world going. I don't know if this is making any sense, but to me, Itkovian is really the embodiment of what I mean when I say that. Like, it only takes one good person to choose to do the right thing to keep the world on the right track. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think about Itkovian all the time. And Memories of Ice, I think, is a book that I will, again, appreciate much more on a reread, and be able to appreciate all of these like philosophical nuances when it comes to characters. There's so much crammed into these books that when you're just trying to get your bearings and understand the world building, you miss out on. Despite that, Memories of Ice is probably one of the best books I've ever read in my life. House of Chains, to me, is a fascinating character study of Karsa Orlong. The first 25% of this book is so gripping, especially now that I'm reading The God Is Not Willing. I just have a deeper appreciation for Karsa Orlong's character. And this book also concludes Felisin and Tavor's relationship in such a crazy, insane way. And Tavor specifically giving up her own family and like quite literally killing her own sister, turning her back on any chance of redemption for herself, and holding that with the knowledge that I have from Crippled God. I don't know, I just really like House of Chains. I think Karsa is a fascinating character, and I really mean that in a way where I find him interesting. I'm obviously not like a Karsa fan. I'm just a fan of what Erikson does with Karsa's character. I probably don't need to say that, but just in case. In fourth place, we have The Crippled God. And again, this is a book that probably when I reread, I will appreciate more. But for me, Crippled God is really more of a intellectually satisfying book. There's so much going on here, and it's quite literally the convergence of all convergences, and every single character, or maybe not every single character, but it feels like every single character that you've met throughout the series thus far is in the Crippled God and is playing a part. All of that is amazing and makes for this fantastic, huge battle. But personally, as I've said many times, I'm not a huge battle person. And so any book where the majority of it is just a huge battle is not going to be my favorite. And just the idea that the Crippled God wasn't this evil force all along, but really just someone who was in need of compassion and needed help. And the fact that someone like Tavor would put everything on the line to help them. That's, again, what I'm coming back to. Like, it only takes one person to do the right thing. To me, that's kind of what I take away from this series. Deadhouse Gates is in third place for me, and I just love Felison as a character. She's probably the most fascinating and well-written exploration of a victim of assault that I've ever read. Just her journey, to me, is not necessarily beautiful, but deeply cathartic to read. Deadhouse Gates is so different from Gardens of the Moon in terms of tone, and it really deals with the human cost of war and what survival really looks like, and how surviving doesn't always mean that you're perfect and healed on the other side. Sometimes surviving just means that you fight as hard as you can with tooth and nail. And the Chain of Dogs sequence really added to that brutal depiction of war. The video I made about Felison after reading Deadhouse Gates is probably the best video I've ever made on this channel. Though at the time I thought it wasn't that good, and looking back on it, I'm so proud of myself for making that video, and it's really what I want this channel to be. I don't know. Yeah, Deadhouse Gates is a fantastic book. Literally, as I'm doing this ranking, I'm like second guessing myself on what I picked and where to put it, but I'm just gonna stick to it. I said Gardens of the Moon in second place, and part of it is because I have such a soft spot for first books in a series. I think that the first book in a series has such an important job of selling you not only the story in that individual book, but the whole package. I loved the sort of episodic and very cinematic feel to this book. I found it to be very humorous as well. I think Erikson in general tends to be a hilarious writer to read. That's on full display here with Krupp's character, and even the ending with Anamanda Rake showing up to this fete in a disguise as if like no one's gonna notice that he's this like 7 foot tall Tist Andi person like with silver hair. I don't know. I love this book and how weird and kooky and unapologetically Malazan it is. Again, this is a Darujhistan book, and as I've said, Darujhistan is my favorite setting in this whole series. I also love how we're introduced to this complex system of gods and warrens, and the stuff with Opon's coin, and how Crocus is like bending down to pick up a coin and that saves his life. Like all this crazy stuff that comes together in this book. I just love that. And I just give this book a lot of credit. In first place, we have Midnight Tides. Honestly, Midnight Tides, probably you could read it as a standalone, though I don't recommend it. You should read the rest of the books, but it's such a interesting deviation from the timeline and the plot at this point. Like, you're halfway through the series and then all of a sudden Erikson just decides to plop you on a completely different continent, on a completely different timeline, and you just have to figure out what's going on, sink or swim. Tehal and Bug are fantasy's most iconic comedy duo in my opinion, and everything that he does with, again, Rulad and theme of power as all-corrupting and all-consuming is so fascinating. The Lethari Empire is in close contest with Darujhistan as one of my favorite settings in the series, and it's such an interesting sort of reflection of, I feel like, American society specifically. In a series of 10 very unique books, Midnight Tides definitely stands out as the most unique. Political intrigue, the world building, everything is perfect in this book in my opinion. Malazan is such an interesting series for me personally because I read it when I was almost a fully formed adult. It really carves out its own space in the fantasy genre. For me personally, reading these books was at times frustrating and challenging, but there was always this feeling that if I got to the end, it would be rewarded. Of course, reading The Crippled God, I feel like it just completely recontextualized how I saw the rest of the series. Having read the 10 books once, I definitely want to revisit the series eventually. The older I get, the more philosophically inclined I am, and I think that Malazan is a series that will grow with me. I also have to say that reading the series changed my life pretty drastically. I think that if I hadn't started Gardens of the Moon, there's a good chance that I would have never met my fiance, which is crazy to think about, but that's a story for a different day. And definitely please leave your rankings in the comments down below. Please share your thoughts and critique and roast my ranking. I'm sure that there are people who are seeing me rank Reaper's Gale in last place and are like, what the hell, girl, you're wrong. Please disagree with me in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next video. Until then, take care.